I think by this point, everyone's sort of realizing the MCU hype train is kind of dying down. It seems like the days of Infinity War and Civil War are long behind us, and instead, we've been facing a lot of projects that seem to be meandering, unfulfilling, unfocused. With the exception of No Way Home, it has largely felt like these movies don't really have a general sense of where they're going. That is, until Antman Quantumania. We were told that this film was going to solve all of our lingering questions and finally give audience members a true direction of where things were headed. And even from the start, I thought that was a weird idea. The Ant-Man movies were mainly used as palate cleansers in between the giant Avengers level events, so the fact that Kevin Feige was using this series to set up the larger conflict of the overall story was interesting. And then I saw the trailer, and it was clear director Peyton Reed wanted to break the mold of Ant-Man dealing with smaller threats. But I thought a lot of the CGI looked... what's the word I'm looking for? Fake. Then the first wave of reviews began to hit online, and oh boy. Critics and audience members were largely split, the general consensus being that Kang was phenomenal, but the movie itself was nothing to write home about. So it was safe to assume that I was not thrilled about seeing this movie. And I have to say, it wasn't terrible. Now, don't get me wrong, it wasn't good either. But I was also expecting this thing to be the Antichrist, so just seeing another mid Marvel movie was a welcome surprise. I'm going to be keeping this review short and sweet because I honestly don't have a lot to say about it. I guess I'll just start out by saying that my concerns regarding the film's visuals were definitely warranted. While it was nice to have actual color back into the MCU movies, the look of concrete gray was starting to wear thin on me. There were entire segments of this movie that looked like they were ripped straight out of Shark Boy and Lava Girl. You could stare at the screen and confidently tell that absolutely nothing you were looking at was real. It's especially evident when you have characters standing in front of a giant cosmic background of nonsense. And by this point, we know that Marvel likes to shoot their movies using a lot of digital tricks. So, just like in previous films, there will be scenes when characters are standing around talking to each other, and it is very evident those actors never actually stepped foot in the same room. I think it's never been more obvious than it is here when a certain actor pops up for a surprise cameo. He's appeared in some of the promotional footage, but I'll still leave it out in case you don't know by this point. But needless to say, this A-list actor shows up, gives some exposition, promptly dies, and not once did I think he was actually on set. Also, speaking of visuals, I have to address the MODOK in the room. Yes, he is in the movie, and yes, he looks pretty awful. If I'm gonna be honest though, I actually thought he was kind of handled well. Now, before you immediately click off the review, just hear me out, okay? Yes, he looks like an awful abomination against nature, but the other characters kind of acknowledge that. And the few jokes that did land in the movie were mainly the jokes directed at him and how he looks. So I don't know. I guess I felt bad for this little floating freak. That being said, it's safe to say the whole Marvel humor thing is starting to grate on my nerves. It doesn't matter if you're on the streets of Brooklyn, the ethereal afterlife plane, or on freaking Pluto, every character you meet is going to sound exactly the same. When the movie itself was opening, it felt like someone was sitting on the fast forward button on the remote control. No scene lasted more than 45 seconds, and I was getting some serious Rise of Skywalker flashbacks. And I'll just say it, the first act was pretty god awful. But then there's a moment when things began to change, and now I can actually get to the part of the review where I start talking about the positives. The critics were right. Jonathan Majors, of course, is phenomenal as Kang. He brings an air of menace to every scene he's in, and he's actually one of the few characters who doesn't have the traditional MCU sense of humor. It's as if Kevin Feige told Peyton Reed if he even gave Kang one dumb joke, he would have Reed exiled back to the Bring It On franchise. You can tell there were specific guidelines in the script to not ruin his grand appearance with quips. Another performance that I thought was great, and something that a lot of people aren't talking about in this movie, is Michelle Pfeiffer. Hope and Hank are sadly sidelined, but Janet Van Dyne gets a lot of moments to showcase some serious action and acting talent. She's felt like a plot device in previous films, but here she really shines. Once information surrounding both her and Kang were revealed, and once the movie goes in a certain direction, I was actually getting pretty excited. Maybe the critics checked out after a terrible first act, and maybe the rest of the movie wouldn't be so bad. And I was right! For about 25 minutes. I'm going to keep details vague, but as the trailer suggests, Kang makes Scott do something for him, and I was under the impression that that was going to be the storyline for the rest of the movie. But it's instead a plot point that's quickly resolved, and what we're left with is a Star Wars esque Revolution subplot featuring a bunch of underdeveloped characters I couldn't care less about. I can pretty much sum this entire movie up in one phrase: trying to do too much while accomplishing so little. Peyton Reed was so dead set on doing the most ambitious storyline possible, he ended up biting off more than he could chew. If this whole movie was just a tale of Kang forcing Scott to go on a simple intergalactic heist, I think it would have largely worked out. Instead, we get a bunch of ideas that feel half baked, and all builds to a conclusion that feels ultimately unsatisfying. As I said before, Jonathan Majors does give a great performance as Kang, but I gotta be honest, I got some serious Christoph Waltz from Spectre flashbacks. In case you all forgot, and it's very understandable why you would, the James Bond film Spectre featured Academy Award winning actor Christoph Waltz playing the villainous Blofeld. He was the head of an evil criminal enterprise, and although he was largely in the background of the movie, there were entire scenes of characters just standing around talking about how scary he was. And when he shows up, he does even more talking, giving long winded monologues about the things he's done in the past and the evil, villainous things he plans to do in the future. But when it actually came down to it, he wasn't really that threatening. Just like Christoph Waltz, Jonathan Majors is giving a great performance as the villain, but with absolutely no material to back it up. I mean, come on, this guy is supposed to be the next Thanos of the franchise, and the way his story concludes in this film just felt too safe. As the trailer emphasized, this is a guy who has literally killed other Avengers before, and I just never got that sense. And there was a moment as things were wrapping up with the story where I thought that the film was going to do a ballsy move. Things were starting to go in a certain direction, and I was thinking to myself, wow, good job, movie. This is actually a risky decision. But the writers almost immediately undo it, and things go back to a nice, safe conclusion. So overall, Ant-Man and the Wasp: Quantumania is a bit of a mess. Its beginning is rushed and choppy, a lot of the visuals look fake, and it all builds to a rather unsatisfactory ending. But don't get me wrong, it's definitely more enjoyable than something like Thor: Love and Thunder, for whatever that's worth. Michelle Pfeiffer and Jonathan Majors carry this thing on their shoulders, and there are a few good ideas that sadly should have been in a different movie. Heck, they should have just made a Kang movie. But I digress. I give Ant-Man and the Wasp: Quantumania a C-.